A warm welcome from my side. I'm Jörg Süßenbach, the director of the Goethe Institute. It's wonderful that you made your way here with this weather to us in the Beacon Street. And a warm welcome to all the guests and visitors online to our event, Who Can Dance? This event is our first cooperation with the Thomas Mann House in Los Angeles. This former residence of the famous German author is now a residency house for fellows coming to the US for several months. And one of the actual fellows is Alice Hasters, a highly acclaimed journalist, author, and podcaster with a strong relation to dance, as I learned. Peter DiMuro has a woven career as a dancer, actor, choreographer, director, teacher, facilitator of creativity, and an arts engager for more than 30 years. As executive director of the Dance Complex, he continues to invest in advancing the craft of choreography and the field of dance, creating an arc of programs for young and established dance makers. I think that's true. And so welcome, Peter, and thanks for being here, all of you. I will pass the mic to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here. And I was just saying to Kurt that I'm hearkening back to traveling as a dancer and a choreographer and going to different countries. And so here I am in this beautiful house and feeling like I'm away from home and always treated well. Something we have to learn about hospitality in the United States. We have to practice more, I think. So we've kind of met you, Alice, already. Podcaster, journalist, author, and your most recent book, What White People Don't Want to Hear About Racism But Should Know, or afraid to ask, perhaps, I don't know, but should know. That's. Oh, really? Oh, there we go. And we have just met, so I'm looking forward to getting to know you better. And Kurt and I have known each other off and on for, well, not off and on, since about 2015 when you came to Boston Conservatory, where I used to teach as well. Associate professor, regarded performer, stager of works, and we're going to see a little bit of the legacy of Limon, and that's part of your history as well. I wanted to just say that I'm here as a listener tonight more than anything else. I'm honored to be here, but I'm a white guy in this conversation every day at the Dance Complex because I'm a citizen of dance. I'm a citizen of the world. And in our place, just like this place, we meet all corners of the world, teaching all kinds of dance by all kinds of people. And so when a question arises in my own place of well, who has the right to teach what style? How can a Japanese born person teach flamenco? You know, what's the legacy there that allows that to happen or not? And we find those questions every day at the Dance Complex, and we make our mistakes, and we trudge through, and we try to be better and better at the practice of being dance citizens of the world. And I think that's what we're trying to do at large with all of our work towards equity, bias, access, agency, and all the other things that come with that. But I was so moved by our little conversation on the phone the other night, and we talked about maybe you could just talk about what's in your body, what's in your mind, what's on your lips, and maybe give us a little snapshot of that, and then we could just have a conversation. Sound good? Yes. Do you want to go first?
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Kurt and Peter, for doing this with me. And thank you to the Goethe Institute for having us. Thank you to the Thomas Mann House for the support. Yes, it's my first time in Boston. My name, has been. Yeah, it's. I came in this morning and I got to see a little bit of this very pretty city. The reason why I wanted to explore this question with you tonight, who can dance, is because it is something that I'm trying. There are two things that kind of informed my interests, my work, who I am. And one of them, I think, that I'm known for a little better, especially in Germany, is writing, especially the writing about identity and blackness in Germany and race and racism in Germany. But the other part, before I became a journalist, I was studying sports, and I was majoring in movement theater and contemporary dance. I was interested in that because I come from a kind of dance family. My father did the same degree and at the same college. We were taught by the same people, actually. But my mother, she is Philadelphia-born, and she is a dancer. Every time you would ask her, "Who are you?" she would answer, "She's a dancer." It's a true thing to her identity. She trained partly at the American School of Ballet in New York, and one day went to an audition that brought her to Brussels. She went on to dance with Maurice Béjart, and then a couple of years later came to Cologne to dance for Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and then later for Pina Bausch. So she made a career in contemporary dance. Later, when I was born, she was working as a choreographer, I'm the youngest of three, taking me and my two older sisters to different places around Europe. And we saw a lot of stages and productions. So that's the world I was growing up in. But I already, but dance has always been close to my heart. And I was very, I was raised with and by dance. But I also, it was also always a topic that was, how do I say it in English? It wasn't, I couldn't approach it very freely in a way. And that being kind of noticing that as a little girl, when I went to ballet class, there was just within this culture, even though it was my mother who was probably the one who was who knew the most about ballet, that wasn't really expected. And the imagery that you see around ballet was one that I always didn't feel so it was fitting. I couldn't really identify with it because the images of ballet dancers were mostly white. So I remember that early on, my mother had tried to convince me that I can dance, and I was also interested in acting, could act, could take any role. I remember this talk that I said, this fight that I had when I was a little girl, and said, I could never play Snow White. And my mom said, yes, you could. So all of this kind of representation, the limits of it were already really present. Then as I was always within my friends group, I kind of noticed that growing up in Germany, it was a majority white surrounding, which I didn't, which was, I mean, was brought up in it, so it seemed normal to me. But when we were dancing, there was always this attention on me in a way that people expected me, that I was able to dance. And I always felt as though there was a kind of awkwardness in expressing myself. And I also felt that the approaches to dance were just very different and also expected to be different. And that kind of accompanied me and kind of ultimately drew me a little bit away from dancing, because I felt there was so much prejudice, so much pressure, being Black on the one hand, and then also a woman on the other hand. And I kind of, was looking for alternative contemporary ways of dancing. And now I come back to that topic of dance because I think these issues are still very much present today. I think about my mother a lot, and ask myself whether she was only able to make a career in contemporary dance when she was trained as a classic ballet dancer. Back in the 70s, I remember the stories she told me that oftentimes were heavily racist, but she kind of handled it differently back then. And I also am just curious about the topic because especially Germany seems to have a troubled relationship with dance. And I think that is also due to a history, to the history of Germany, that I think dance was in the 20s and 30s was very much alive in Germany, but then the Nazi regime drew, like, a lot of dancers left, got persecuted, died. And it's a legacy that never really, that has a hard time rebuilding itself and also its relationship. So Germany, it feels like it's a country that doesn't dance, really. And all of that informs this question that I have of who can dance, and a lot more. And I'd love to hear on it. Especially, I wanted to talk to you because I noticed a video on the Berkeley site, and you were talking about diversity in dance. I read your CV and was amazed. And I would love to explore the question of what diversity in dance really means. Is it an approach? Yeah, do we need to honor such things like heritage? What does what does it mean aesthetically? That sometimes gets thrown in there as a critique when especially ballet diversifies, and I think that's very problematic. And all of these, I know it's like a broad kind of like buffet of things that I now offered, but but that is maybe there are different things to pick up on or leave behind.
Sure. Maybe introduce yourself a little bit, and then maybe that we could pitch into some of these questions too.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Kurt Douglas. I am an associate professor at Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. I am also have been a 15-year member of the Limon Dance Company in New York City. I'm also a member of the board of directors of Limon, and I also teach in the school and restage the work all over the world. And this question that you pose has been something that has been part of my sort of experience as a man of color, navigating spaces that weren't necessarily created for me or curated for me. And so I share your sentiment, and I understand. I found myself having a little bit of a visceral reaction to some of the things that you would say, especially talking about your mother's experience. And I think this question about who dance and who gets to decide whose voice matters, has been a question that has been sort of being chipped away at little by little. And again, this is not a light switch, right? It's not something that we can turn a light switch on and all of a sudden everything is rosy, right? There is lots of tough conversation that has to be had because of trauma and because of pain that exists within an idiom that wasn't necessarily created with the idea of diversity in mind. right? And so I say that, I'm going to say a little quote by Jose, we are never more truly and profoundly human than when we dance. And so the whole scope for the and premise of the company, Jose's was interested in this idea of the human spirit and the human condition. How do we celebrate that? What does it mean to do that? And I think within recent years, that question has been, that sort of ideology has become more sort of palpable in spaces. And I really believe that the training is starting to change, the conversations are starting to change, and that's where we're able, as educators, starting to make space for these, not only the questions to happen, but actualization to happen, physicalization to happen through these questions, right? For me as an educator, it's very important for me to make space for my students' identity. When I was at training, many of the teachers would tell me to leave myself at the door, leave everything at the door and come in empty, to be an empty vessel for the choreographer. And it would always not make sense to me. First of all, I can't wash my blackness off. I can't, right? I cannot shed all of my trauma. I cannot shed basically the things from the day. How can I leave that at the door? I argue, bring it into the room, bring it with you, bring your complexity, bring your heritage, bring your culture, and use that as a catalyst for intention to create movement. Does that make sense? I preface this because this is sort of new and uncharted territory for the educational sector. So the questions that you're asking are at the right time, because these are the conversations that are happening, right? How do we move away from this patriarchal structure of I'm the teacher, you're the student, and sort of like take that away and sort of create a space where everyone's learning, and everyone's learning not necessarily through a physical exploration, but also through dialogue, through an understanding that your history, your heritage, your culture, where you came from informs the way you move, and that matters, and it should be celebrated. And that's what I think Jose's at the crux of this understanding, that celebrating humanity, celebrating the human spirit, was at the crux of what Jose was trying to convey, or was trying to explore. The fact that I'm going to talk a little bit about Jose. I should probably play a little bit of the video just so you can see a little bit of his movement practice. I'll tell you a little bit about Jose. Was born in 1908. And immigrated to America, Mexican-American man, cis male, who came to the United States. He was a sculptor and a painter, and a visual artist. And soon, at the age of 22, he came and he found dance at 22. And he found taking class with a woman by the name of Doris Humphrey, who was considered one of the founding voices of American modern dance. Studying with Doris sort of inspired in Jose to push past and to sort of take up these notions of what does it mean to sort of get off of the point shoe, to take off the corset, to let the hair down, instead of dealing with these ethereal sort of ballet aesthetics, to look at what does it mean to be a human in the world? What does it mean to struggle? What does it mean to play in and out of gravity? What does it mean to sort of work in opposition? What does it mean to fight, to resist death, right? And so we do it every day. And so I think the question for Jose was, how do I celebrate this notion of the human spirit and humanity? And I think one way he did that was through his own story of being a person of color in the spaces that were not created by him. There was no one else that looked like him making work. And I think he took it a step further and evolved it even more to an understanding than what Doris was doing, to even take it to a place where he allowed his own heritage to speak through these ideas, right? He took his folkloric, Mexican folkloric heritage, plus the polyrhythms from his culture, and he used that as a catalyst to speak his truth and to create work. And I think that was what made his work so powerful. The fact that it was not just about being Mexican, it was about being a human. And so I think that's why the company survived it has survived almost 80 years because we continue to ask those questions. I'm going to stop the video now. To continue to ask those questions, and those questions never get old about humanity. Love, hate, pain, joy, struggle, falling down and getting back up. All of these notions we deal with on a daily basis, and it's a part of our human experience. And I think for me, that's what inspired me to continue and to start doing the work and to really sort of to now take it into, to chew on it and allow my own sort of culture, my own heritage, as a Guyanese, South American man, cis man, working in an idiom that wasn't necessarily made for me either. And so I think moving forward, I take all of this and I continue to sort of to perpetuate this notion of intention. What is the intention? Right? The intention is to celebrate the human spirit and the human condition. And how do I do that? By asking my students to go inside, right? By asking them to peel the layers back. And I think that's where the conversations have to start.
You've both brought this up in great ways already. You talked about your own training, Kurt, and how you were asked to leave yourself at the door. So it's almost like, as I imagine, and I studied Limon a long while, I knew the backstories of some things that I should know, but that's another story. But this idea that at a time it's almost institutionalized, you have to do it in the way that Jose did, or people who followed him, who are trying to keep something kind of plastic in place, as opposed to the spirit that you mentioned comes from ballet folkloric. And like your mother training in ballet, these institutions, or when that happens and it takes the folk out of the dance in the way, I don't know, maybe that's a place to start to converse.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your introduction, the input. There is so much there already. I also think it is interesting to see that we are at this, that these conversations are so present now, because a lot of times I think there's this romantic idea that people say, well, dance is a unifier of itself, because if everybody dances, everybody becomes humanized, and this thus it will work by itself, that dancing is just that it doesn't require any work, or that there are no issues there. Also kind of erasing that dance has been instrumentalized also to separate and to maintain power structures. There's kind of really separating dance by gender, by race, and also there's a hierarchy that is still very present, I feel, today. And what dance do we value, and what dance do we think is necessary to do other dances? I found it very interesting, this, you have been told to come serve as an empty vessel.
For the choreographer, right?
Exactly. And I also want to, the question of, that ballet serves as a must for every other dance, or to make it as just only if you know ballet, you can call yourself a professional dancer. Only if you go through that sort of training. And I'm also a very big fan of the aesthetic of ballet, or what it does, what this training does to the human body. We are so used to seeing this as an aesthetic that we appreciate. But what does that mean for other dances? Why don't we look at other dances as a baseline for that we can evolve in, or that it can be transferred into other disciplines? So that is.
I completely agree. I look at the ballet in terms of when we talk about ballet, we talk about the many different sort of styles within it. Balanchine, Vaganova, Cicchetti, all of these styles are celebrated. When we talk about, we bring up African dance, we talk about African dance as if it's monolithic, right? We talk about not, erasing this notion, the fact that Africa is made up of many different languages, as many different shades of black you see. There's as many different styles of dance. There are
histories attached,
and history with major histories attached to it. But that's not at the forefront, and that's not celebrated within our culture. And it's done on purpose, right? It was done on purpose because, again, these systems were set up by people who did not look like you or me, right? And so this is where we get into this space of what the conversation of now of, we are training young dancers to be activists. Like, how do we get them to sort of think about these things? And so the training has completely changed. When I was in school studying dance, we didn't talk about race, gender, class, sex. Those things were not part of the purview of dance education. Fast forward, 20 years later, these questions are now starting to be posed as to why aren't we discussing these things? Why are we talking about why aren't we talking about the rich history of African dance and all it has to offer? And why aren't we looking at the rubric to allow students to gain entrance into some of these prestigious schools or any sort of institutions? Why are we only looking at the ballet, right? Why are we looking at ballet first? Why can't we look at other styles as forms of technique, right? Because technique is technique. Right? You could be technically proficient in one particular style and still be able to access information in another, right? And so these are the challenges about pushing back against sort of these structural institutions and trying to make claims to say, hey, look, we have to look at how we're educating young moving bodies, because they're not just moving bodies, they're thinking bodies as well. And so in order to sort of like meet the moment, we have to sort of reevaluate the conversations we're having, the spaces we're curating, the way we talk, think about dance, the way we access information, the way we disseminate information. How about that? The way we talk about it, right? That is crucial, right? The way we have empathy. Like you have to be able to have empathy for yourself if you're going to have empathy for someone else. And so that takes being able to strip back the layers and doing the thing actually that's the most difficult to do is to take a look at yourself, take a look at the choices that you make without judgment, having the experience first, and then having a conversation about it afterwards.
You said something on the call the other day, and I don't want to interrupt, but the word sanitization was brought up when we talk about dance and stripping the person out of it. But also, it's easier to record the sanitized version of ballet. Here's the four positions and with Graham, similar things that we were all trying to be coded to the value system that we could measure. And it's something like persona and spirit that when you watch a beautiful dance that's from Haiti or that's hard to codify exactly what's happening physically. And I think there's a distrust of emotion. But when you use the word sanitization the other day on the call, it struck me as so true. So that's my interruption. I'll go back.
No, you're not interrupting. You're part of this.
I'm just so fascinated.
I'm also fascinated about, I'm learning so much already. So with teaching dance, though, even when we can criticize, or it's very necessary to criticize how we approach dance and what we deem as, good or bad or valuable or high art, low art, or whatever. There is, of course, and I want to know how you approach this, especially for students, a longing or a need for guidance of like, where should they go and how what is actually something that they should look into or what practice. So that is always that. Where do we find the difference between guidance and like kind of opposing something on them, and how do you navigate that?
Great question. No, totally. It's a great question. I always say that I always preface this by saying that I am always so blown away and fascinated by the students and that I work with and everybody that comes in the room. I always remind them that you come with a wealth of knowledge already, so you're not starting from scratch, right? What I'm here to do in the room is to add to the arsenal that you already have. And so when you were posing the question, I thought about this notion of intention, right? Like, what is the intention? What is your intention? And helping them to sort of figure out what their intentions are is everything. Because when you have intention, you have a desire. And when you have desire, you have a goal. Right? And so it becomes less about me imposing what I think they should be doing, and it becomes more important for them to start to see the transitional elements of how they are navigating from one space to the next. For them to understand that they have agency over their own choice making in terms of how I pick up this water bottle. There's a million ways I can do it, right? To where they want to go for their next steps in dance. Right? There's choices there. You get to decide how you want to craft your space. And so it's a lot more work for the educator and for the teacher, because you have 30 people in the room and you have to do more work, and you can't teach from excuse my French, a whitewashed a wall. You have to look at each individual student, each individual dancer, and see them for who they are and meet them where they are, and help them to try to navigate the spaces that they're in. And that means they're coming from completely different walks of life, completely different backgrounds, that each have just as much value as the other. And I think that's the challenge, is changing the minds also of the educators, of the teachers. It's not necessarily, only imposed on the students. It's a symbiotic relationship, right? And what I get out of it is being able to understand that there's another way of navigating this particular material that I'm giving, right? It's not just me imposing and them regurgitating. It's me sharing and them responding without judgment. Truthfully and honestly. And that's how we train artists, right? Forget the dancers, training artists to be performing on stage in real time, making real choices, making honest choices, and speaking truth to power.
I love that. I think there's also something that is, for a lot of people, or how we learn it, counterintuitive. And there's a mission of carrying on a legacy, preserving something. And on the other hand, that translates to a lot of people, nothing can change. It has to always look like it used to. And the people expressing it have to look like the people that have done it before. And these things that dance carries also, like this manifestation of sexism and racism also would get carried on if you just look at the preserving part in that way. But if you look at dance being something that that is inherently vivid, alive, always, in the present, and always fleeting in a way, then it becomes something different. So I like that what you're trying to preserve is the part of intention and the mission that you described before. So, and encouraging students to have their own interpretation of that, or find their own answer to that. In Germany, we had, I think that, especially when we look at classical dance, I think we have a long way to go in it. Especially in the room of ballet, there was recently, not that long ago, I think 1 or 2 years ago, a little bit of a scandal. I forgot the dancer's name, unfortunately. She is a Black woman, a French Black woman, who danced in Berlin in the ballet company, and spoke out that she was treated very, that the people were very racist towards her, especially when they were practicing Swan Lake, kind of commenting of how costumes would look at her, and that she should paint her face white, because there's a sequence where the dancers have white paint on their face, and like all of these things kind of glossing over that if a Black body arrives in this choreography, we have to we can't just continue everything as it is, and that is not a bad thing. That is but yeah, there was apparently like a big stubbornness.
I think it goes back to what you said about this notion of power, right? Because the people who are running these companies, who are almost faceless, you can't really point and see. I mean, yes, you have an artistic director, you have an executive director, but those notions of racism run very deep. And this is not anything new, okay? This has been going on for a very long time, especially when you think about the establishment of Black dance companies in America, right? So those companies were established because of those tropes, because of those experiences that they experienced working in companies that were predominantly white. And so they decided to go ahead and formulate their own sort of spaces where they could speak their truth. I'm talking about Alvin Ailey, Philadelphia, Dayton Contemporary Dance Company, Dallas Black, these companies, and many Dance Theater of Harlem, and many, many more. I think it goes back to this notion of holding on to power and holding on to this legacy or this vision that really doesn't want to be there, because time is moving on and conversations are happening and notions are changing and bodies are actively in protest by just being in spaces where they weren't meant to be, right? And so these people are now being forced to try to hold on for dear life for what they remember. And I think that it comes out of comes out of fear, and even which makes me more ready to do the work that I'm doing and know that what I'm doing is working, and know that what I'm doing has value and matters, because you feel that you sense the desperation. And I'm not just talking about only in dance. I mean, you see it across many, many disciplines. But especially in dance, I mean, you see many companies, promoting Black principles now, and I'm like, okay, thank you for that one little thing, but let's go a little deeper. All right, I'm glad that you have a Black principle, but let's have some conversation about the systematic issues that are plaguing your actual institution. Let's talk about the through line here, and so. Those conversations are slowly happening, and more people are starting to speak out and have their voices heard and actually allow their bodies to be part of the resistance, which is pretty inspiring.
I ask along those lines. We started this discussion by saying or asking the question, who can dance? But it seems to me we're on the verge of whose story is in the dance, or who's telling the story inside this, because you can paste another person into a position, but the system hasn't changed, and it's a single voice. And I think that the same thing that happened for some of the ballet companies is happening generationally in the Black identified companies as well. Like, the young folks inside these companies are yearning to have their stories told, because it's a different time. And because I'm old enough to remember the 60s and how things changed in dance, in its still predominantly white way, just in church in America, but where some of the hierarchy of ballet up here and modern down here, and I'm borrowing from Liz Lerman, if you're watching in the house, my former boss, where we take this idea of the spectrum, or this idea of hierarchy, and make it flat into a spectrum. So not one thing's better than another, but our existence, so that you have a single person-led company over here, or a collaborative, which has its own problems too. But I wonder for both of you how you see tomorrow's dances being made. Do we experiment with collaborations where I have a mentee in a college program I'm advising who has conceived of the project, but he took the artistic direction and handed it out to everybody in the room. And so it's just a fantastic thing to think about. If we don't like what's happening, how can we change that? And do we break the model?
I think you should.
Okay, sure. I think collaboration is key. I think more conversation is required than less. I think failure. I think we need to try because I think when we fail, that's when we have the most choices available to us. I think that is the biggest lessons to learn because there's nowhere else to go but in a new direction, right? And I noticed I didn't say up on purpose. It's a new direction, right? We have to change the way we think and speak to ourselves about the things that we do and how we navigate through the world. I think that's number one. I'm a big believer in collaboration. I think that is the way forward. I think that if we talk to each other more, I think that we would learn a great deal more about ourselves. And I think really that's the way forward. And I think it's happening slowly.
It doesn't, if we don't do that, it doesn't really reflect the world that we live in right now. There's just people who are coming, or dancers of today, they carry very complex stories with them. And it is already, oftentimes they're implicated in different ways, in different memories, legacies, histories. So I think dance has to reflect that, and that will automatically, not automatically if the structures don't allow it, but if we would have structures that would allow, I think, an organic way of changing and evolving, I think that is inevitably the direction it will go in. What I take away from the things that you're saying, Kurt, is that we should think really about what legacy means. Because a lot of times people think legacy means that dance has to look one certain way, but I think we should change that in preserving the legacy of the intention, of the reason why people started dancing or started a certain style, a certain company. And what does that mean today? That goes for, every dance company. It also goes for the traditionally Black companies. What does that mean today to preserve that legacy? And that requires a constant reflection of where we are right now and what is necessary. What do we need? I think if that would be the philosophy in dance institutions, that would allow for a lot more exciting things to happen.
It strikes me with that, too, is that there are systems in our dance world that are not about the dance company, but they're about we have a Haitian-American artist, Jean Apollon, who teaches on Saturday afternoons, and he teaches this community class. But I have to say that I feel like there's more technique in that room about humanness ever present. So it's like, I guess it's the value system of what we think of the multiple ideas of rigor, the multiple ideas of technique, like the technique to watch that class, and there's little kids running around seemingly not paying attention, but they're paying attention to the music and the drums and to me that feels like there might be some information in when we go to perform things, do we have to be so plastic or calcified in the ignoring the intention? I don't know. if that's something we can learn from each other that way. No. We have a few minutes left. I don't know if you want to. Please.
Or I would like to explore something with you, which is, of course, it's a big topic, but I think it kind of belongs into the question who can dance, which is the very heavily discussed topic around cultural appropriation. Because I think, it's a topic that has, or a discussion that has, how do you call it? It's justified in a way, but on the other hand, it's often misunderstood, I feel, because people think just because you present a problem in a certain dynamic, people think, okay, the thing to do is to not do that anymore, to not have an exchange anymore, which is not true, I think. And especially for dance, that would be devastating for art in general. That's how I see it. So the thing is, but also in a time where people are growing more conscious of their identity and what their identity means and brings to the table, is that something that comes up in your teaching, within the conservatory? Is that something that is discussed? And can you speak a little bit on that?
I think this idea of appropriation has been, within the last few years especially, with people becoming much more aware of how things are being presented. I think across colleges, I think that conversation has been happening more and more, with people being a lot more present. And for me, I think it has to do with intention and intent. Again, I do. I think what are you doing with it? How are you presenting that information? And also, what are you doing to give back to that community that you are honoring? Right? I mean, are you selling out stadiums and keeping the money for your own profits, or are you selling out stadiums and giving that money to the community that you are, the communities that you are celebrating, right? That you are honoring, right? I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, when I think about the early aspects of this idea of appropriation. I think about Ruth St. Denis and Ruth St. Denis, who was, again, one of the early voices of American modern dance, who sort of appropriated Eastern culture all over the work, and in the worst possible way. And Ted Sean as well. So it's Ruth St. Denis and Ted Sean, both of them. And it was for profit. It was a profiteering. It was a business, right? And for me, again, it goes back to how are you honoring, and how are you honoring the work? And I think that is sort of the fine line for me when it comes to this notion of appropriation. I think sometimes you can get into a space where that sometimes doesn't matter to people, and I get it. I see it. I get it. But I also think that there has to be space made and conversations had around those notions, so that it doesn't go into the space of sort of attack mode just for attack mode, and that we are having conversations and questions why, and also having opportunities to sort of go to those communities and find out how do they want to be represented. That also is a part of it. I mean, I think about this term. I hear it all the time. Outreach. And for me, sometimes that's a little bit of a problematic term, especially when a company goes into a community without even consulting the community and asking them, what do you need? How can we serve you? How can we be of service to you? That's different from saying, I'm going to come into your community and give you something that you didn't ask for. Right? And something that I can't even use. Right? And so it's again, that fine line of, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So I think there's lots more conversations to be had on it, yeah. But I think we can start by cracking open this notion again about intention and not what you do it, but how you do it.
Yeah, there's also always this thing of, people try to, kind of like misunderstood approaches to avoid cultural appropriation, because there's this problem of giving up control in a way and giving up power. At the end of the day, it is about power too, especially to what you just described, the going into communities and see like, here we have something for you, and it becomes very evidential that there's very little understanding of.
You're very right. I grew up with the term outreach in it, and it just never even sat well with, where the master is coming to, put your hands. And then for a while, the term community engagement, which my practice is called a community practice, as it is at the dance complex. But even that has changed over time, and the idea that I might be hired, or Liz Lerman or Jowle Willa Jo Solar would be hired to go in and interpret for a group of people. So the the intent is very different these days in that work, and we're better for it. We're just much better for it, I think, on that way.
For my last words, I'm very, very grateful for this conversation. Thank you so much. It was very enlightening for me. I am taking away that, this new understanding of what carrying on a legacy in dance means, how teaching dance will evolve, hopefully, and you're giving me a lot of hope. And I'm excited for the future of dance. So thank you.